All right, now it's recording, so we have that for that. So let me bring these, so I just showed that. So Conrad will talk to us about the Red Cross and size. So just to give a sense of size, Conrad, what's the budget, what's the revenue, how many employees and volunteers? Can you just tell us?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. The size of the Canadian Red Cross, I think in terms of budget varies a little bit because of big events. Sometimes we have big events that bring in more, but the last 2 years, between 600 and 800 million a year in terms of size, and about 2,400 employees, about 25,000 volunteers.
So it's a big organization that does a lot of neat things. And so I'll turn over to Conrad to tell us about it.
Well, thanks, Carl. And how do I control this?
Just press
Right.
this button here.
Yeah, I think I got from Carl some interesting questions from many of you, and I wouldn't mind doing a bit of an interaction. So I'm gonna try to go fast on the slides to give you a bit of context. And I think you got these slides before, right?
Yeah, I've got them, and they're also on my courses. So
Right.
you have a available
So,
to you as well.
I mean, it's always, you know, it's always hard to summarize just in a few minutes, and I do want to get a moment. And I just realized I put some notes coming into this because I thought I'd give you a little bit of context to some of your questions that were very good. But I think one of the important things, and Carl mentioned it, the Red Cross is not a small organization. It's a fairly large organization. It's more an institution in the community in terms of structure. So there's a lot of components when you're studying business and management that apply. It's been a big push in terms of professionalizing the organization in the last few years. The difference is it's a non-for-profit. A big difference is the motivation of people who join the Red Cross. I think we were saying earlier, there is no question in terms of what the value is or why people join in terms of the purpose of the organization. So one of the big aspects, of course, in whatever we do in terms of leadership in the organization is the purpose, the motivation, the engagement. It's interesting, we have volunteers and this is moving by itself. Did I press something so it's moving like this?
Well, I think you said that there's AI in the room, and you said you're going to go through it quickly. So I think the AI is,
You're serious?
no, I'm just kidding.
I was getting impressed there. You know, we say jokingly, and it's the serious thing, we have a lot of volunteers and people that engage. The hardest thing for us is to fire a volunteer because people are committed to the organization. They're not doing it for salary, and it's part of their life. And at one point, if they're for whatever reason, they're not, it's not appropriate for them to continue. It's very difficult to change. So you need to understand that in the context. Just some general contextual side. I mean, this is a bit of me. I think you've seen that, and some of you have asked some questions. But sorry, I don't know what's happening here.
Let me. You just press one button. That's really.
No, but it just jumped in.
No, I know, it's weird. Here, let me try.
Okay, I know this is one of the things that is not always understood. I hear the Red Cross, the International Red Cross. There's three components to the Red Cross movement. So the Canadian Red Cross is an independent organization. It's part of the family of Red Crosses. There's 191, there it goes again, 191 Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in the world, and in Israel it's the Magen David Adom under the International Federation, and there's the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is a separate organization. So there's three components: the International Federation, International Committee. We're talking about the Canadian Red Cross. Are we?
Why don't we just go with that? Because it won't move,
that's fine.
I think.
That's fine. So if you look at the Canadian Red Cross in terms of the general context, I put here, and you know, there's some questions that some of you sent me in terms of trust. We do brand trust. We hire an external organization in terms of measuring the trust of the organization on an annual basis. We've adjusted this in the last few years because we do a lot of communications, but fundamentally, what's the most important thing is, are you trusted? Are you trusted by the public? Are you trusted by the people you help? Are you trusted by donors? So it's interesting for us. somebody has access to this somewhere else there.
You could, I think it's in your bag, you must have a
Clicker.
a mouse or a clicker or something that, because I think everything, but.
You think it's a mouse?
It's
Like a
something-
small rodent just seems irrelevant, but, okay, that's a Roman, that's a good point. Okay.
That's a joke from a certain period.
Yeah.
No, go down one more. One more. So the interesting thing at a time where there's a real erosion in trust in institutions, we're seeing the rise actually in trust in the Red Cross. The Red Cross actually is the most trusted organization in the country at about 89%. And we test this on a regular basis when there's events as well. This is all a little contextual. This one, now if we're also, about a third of our revenue comes from charitable giving. We're in this case, we're in between the number 1 and number 3 organizations in terms of giving in Canada. This was about $250 million of donations a few years ago. I can get into that in terms of the questions. I'm just giving you a little bit of context. This is one of the more important ones that I'd like to take your attention on. This is the rise of different events, and I like to say, if you talk 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, 80% of our large operations were international. The tsunami in Indonesia, mostly the earthquake in Haiti, a number of these events. In the last 5 years, 80% of them are domestic. And so you see, this is the size of our operations. In the last 10 years, $1.6 billion of operations in emergency management. First 5 years, 570, but look at the last 3 years, 725 million. So you see definitely the rise of disruptive events. Now there's the pandemic, of course, in the last few years, but 89% related domestic aid, 11% international, and 70% government funding, 30% donations. So definitely a shift in terms of the events. If we think of things we're watching for these days, we can look at the LA fires. You've seen that. More events of, now it's interesting, just a little side note, the fires in California are not more important than last year. Actually, I think they were bigger last year, but they just happened to hit an urban area. And last year we had some very big fires in Canada, didn't hit urban areas, but the chances are that they hit urban areas are very high. In Canada, we have fires in the west and the flooding in the east with the hurricanes. So just the point is disruptive events. Now, in our new planning process, we're looking at how we prepare for disruptive events. And I say disruptive events because it could be climate related disease, but also we had a major operation with supporting migration, asylum seekers. We did a lot of the hosting of the Ukrainians' arrival. We were preparing a few months ago for a potential mass evacuation of Lebanese. There's about 40,000 Canadian passport holders in Lebanon. Should they need to be evacuated rapidly if the conflict increased. So you're seeing, a number of potentially disruptive events. So this is a shift. Now, it's a shift in Canada, but it's also a shift everywhere else in the world. So events are growing in different contexts in other parts of the world as well. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things related to this, but I'm just giving you a bit of context here. I'm not going to go over this one because it's going to be a little technical. This is our operations in the last year across the country. We're doing, just so you know though, we do also a lot of the evacuations in the north. We do all the evacuations of First Nation communities in the north. And when we talk about what we do, and well, actually, I'll talk about that in terms of Jasper, and then I'll just open it up for an exchange because I think it may be more interesting. So what's changed in the last few years? This is, if you take an operation, if you try to understand what the Red Cross does, when you see a response, when you see a fire, when you see an evacuation, we spend a lot of time looking at the event, the fire itself, the buildings that are destroyed. I was with a federal minister recently who just been appointed in terms of in charge of emergency response. He's a former police chief. And I said, to understand what we're doing, if you take a big city like Montreal, you have a big fire, The firefighters come, the police come, you put the yellow cordon, you secure the space. They're injured people, you take care of them, you take everybody, you put them in the bus. We take care of the people in the bus. And so last year we had a fire in Jasper. So Jasper is a national park. If you're not from Canada, 7,000 people evacuated, about the third of the town is burned. There's an initial part, everybody has to evacuate. Some people go to family and friends. Other people need to go to hotels. So in the case, what does the Red Cross did? We managed the hotels in Edmonton for those that were displaced. We provided financial assistance, and we register them on our system, and we provide direct financial assistance, and then we monitor where they are, and we provide support. This is funded partly by the province, partly by us, partly by the municipality. More complicated because everybody gets reimbursed by the federal government. But anyway, this is what we do. And then we're going into the recovery. The recovery is, and I'll show you the challenges. So this is Jasper. This is the municipality of Jasper. And these are, in gray, you have the damage. And the large things are the vulnerability assessments in terms of people that are impacted. So it's always interesting when there's a big fire. You know, some people can lose their homes, but they're fully insured. Other people are not insured. There's renters. There's a large part of the population that's underinsured or poorly insured. There's a lot of small businesses. So you could be a small business in Jasper. You're not affected at all. Your business is not burned down and all that, but the town's closed. You have no more activity. So there's a number of programs. So we provide direct financial assistance, support to small business. And right now we're working with the town because this is, of course, this is particular to Jasper. There's a huge, basically it's tourism. So there was a housing crisis prior to this fire. And now the fire's destroyed a large parts of accommodations. So they're going to have to, in the next year, they have construction workers that come in to rebuild. They have seasonal workers. They have the tourist season, and they have people who live there full time. So there's a real challenge to how do you put temporary housing? If you don't have temporary housing for the seasonal workers, nobody's going to work there. The tourist season won't start. It will affect the economy. So we're working on solutions, and we're in a space that's insured, sometimes not insured. There's a lot of gaps, and the insurance structure, you'll hear a lot more about that because the events are getting more and more frequent. What you're seeing is, I mean, in an ideal world, everybody's insured, but you're seeing the insurance now, what we call de-risking. So insurance are not covering parts of the country. You've seen this in Florida in the last little years. You'll hear that in the States a lot more. When the events hit every year, well, the insurance companies say it's not worth insuring. You know, it's too costly, or the insurance will go up very high. So there's huge gaps in adapting the system. So I'm throwing a lot of pieces at you, but you get a little bit, we're in the space of helping people in this situation. I don't know, oh, this is the wrong one here. Now, we're also engaged internationally, and I just put a little bit of the journey of the Red Cross in the last few years for you here. The Red Cross has, I mean, one of the strengths of the Canadian Red Cross is our ability to adapt, the ability of the organization to adapt to what's current in the present theme. So if you think the Canadian Red Cross, we were a major actor during the Second World War, providing relief items, food packages to Europe, etc. In the post-World War period, it was the blood program. One of the biggest challenges in Canada was water safety. Water safety was a public health issue in Canada in the post-World War period. This is a country of lakes and rivers, and Canadians didn't know how to swim. The drowning rate was very high. The Red Cross was very involved in there, and today it's the space of the natural disasters. this is a bit of the journey. Now, all this started off, if you're and this is a management school or, you know, a business. It started off as a crisis in, 25 years ago. The Red Cross here managed the blood program in Canada, and there was a tainted blood scandal. 3,000 Canadians died because the blood was contaminated, and there was a national inquiry, and the bottom line is the Red Cross lost the blood program. So this was 2/3 of our operations. So you can imagine if you're running an organization that 2/3 of our operations went down to zero. And then you have the slow rebuild of the Red Cross. One of the most important things for us was the tsunami. This is the fundraising in blue to major events. The tsunami of 2004, where we raised over $300 million. And this was the beginning of transforming this. In some ways, I say these have been our R&D. We developed our fundraising, receiving, we've invested a lot in the digital space in this time. Haiti earthquake was a big time for our international operations. And then we started having the natural disasters. At the same time, we deployed for Ebola response, the Alberta fires, which were critical, and this has grown. And our biggest year ever was during COVID, where we launched a number of health programs supporting the provinces and the federal government. So this is a bit of the space we're in.
So one of the things we'll talk about in the textbook is change. And so this is about enormous change, but companies got to go through this as well as the market evolves. So I sat down with the CBC president, and she's saying is that no one watches the news anymore, relatively. I'm not even sure when it's on, but 10, 20 years ago, I would watch the news at 10 o'clock or 6:30. So there's an evolution of where people get news from, and the CBC's got to go with that. So CBC is transforming a lot because you guys are changing. Well, you're getting your news, your parents are getting news differently. So the Red Cross, like, boy, fell off a cliff because we can't provide blood, and that's central what we do. And they transformed over a number of years by getting better fundraising, but around things like the tsunami. And the Red Cross is trusted to get the money where it needs to go. And that's, as he pointed out earlier, one of the most trusted organizations in Canada. So it's an important role for them.
Yeah, so I think that the big message here is, and so I've been the CEO for 16 years, so I came, but 25 years now, right? So I came during that blood period. You know the saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. So I leveraged the crisis moment to change the structures of the organization and modernize them. One of the quotes I like from, I did my IMHL with Henry Mintzberg, says organizations have the structures often of their year of inception. Maybe you're talking about challenges at the CBC, but you know, the Red Cross had a structure that was very federative model across the country, and we don't adapt to the new times. So we use this crisis to change the organization, to streamline, to professionalize, etc. And so we went from that crisis to be the most trusted organization in the country today. Our challenges right now as an organization is the events are no longer exceptional. They're ongoing. So if you're dealing with an exceptional event, we do a big fundraiser, we deal with that event. Now we're seeing events happening more and more in a recurring way. So our conversations with government, we got some support is let's remove the barriers to response and let's build up the standing capacity between events. The challenge we have in Canada, we say, is we don't have a culture of preparedness. We're not really, we don't think these events happen to us. Or in a sense that they happen to others and all of a sudden they're happening to us. You can see that conversation every time you look at these big events, you look at what's happening in LA, people said, I didn't think it'd happen here, right? I didn't think I'd be evacuated. But the reality is they're happening. We can deal with them. We can be better prepared. We need to anticipate, but we need to build the standing capacity in terms of responding to these events. So we're in this space, but at the same time, the infrastructure, the structure of insurance is not adapted, but the structure of government's not adapted as well. A lot of this is under first responders. On average, when you lose your home in Canada, you're away from your home for more than 2 years before the rebuild, before everything else. So things are not structured for that. So everything has to change. So we're in the space of advocacy and helping the government change their structures, at the same time build our own funding for that, engaging. So that's a bit of that space. Internationally, we have an expertise in Canada for health. Internationally, we deploy internationally and in the north. Actually, so we have mobile health capacity. We have very state-of-the-art mobile health units that we've deployed in Ukraine, in Syria, in different parts. And we played a big role on infectious disease we have Ebola, cholera clinics, etc. So one of the interesting things is what happened is we deployed this internationally, but when the pandemic happened, we managed all the quarantine of Canadians that were arriving in the country. What we did is we brought our experts in infectious disease internationally, and we were brought back to Canada, and they helped us build the protocols and the response. So bit of the message is we can't be good at what we don't do often. So we do a lot of this domestically across the country, but how do we prepare for the next pandemic? We need to be where infectious disease is growing in different places. So anyway, we're building that. I'm throwing a lot of things at you and you had a lot of questions. So I just wanted to put a bit of context, but maybe open it up in exchange and answer some of your questions. Carl sent me 2 lists, and if I went through everything, we'd be here
Who
for
sent
a
me
few
those
hours.
questions? So we have volunteers over here.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, we can start.
Mhm.
The first question I had, was more so, how do you manage the balance between, an immediate crisis or issue? And then maybe more so like a long-term humanitarian, intervention?
Okay, so tell me more a little bit.
So in terms of strategy, how do you focus on both without? Because I think it's really easy to get caught up in the immediate,
Right,
right? So there's a fire, there's a flood, action has to happen now.
Yeah.
Versus a long term, maybe helping
right.
with the blood or with,
Yeah, so
interaction.
we know the cycle of the emergencies, and you're right. And I think it's and we try to push that a little bit in the media. You know, because there's a tendency to saying you need to spend everything right away. But the cycle of a response in Canada is going to be a few years, 2-3 years. So you need so when we fund, we balance it by putting part of the money in the immediate, but also understanding the other part. But we're trying to also in the messaging to say it takes time. And why does it take time? It's the same internationally. So there's a cycle in terms of the different parts of recovery, of response and recovery.
Do you find you have to focus more now on the immediate, just because there's, like you were saying, there's more events happening, it's almost consecutive versus, let's say, 10-15 years ago?
I think the events are, I think we're focusing more on the recovery is growing quite a bit in the last few years because the events are getting bigger and the people are being impacted, are being displaced for longer periods. So it's actually our recovery business has grown quite a bit, but it's not visible because part of the challenge is you see what you see on the media. So you see the immediate and then it falls off. So we see the rest, right?
So you get the media to get people to give money.
Well, we don't get the media.
No, but you work with the media to get
Yeah.
media coverage.
We don't, yeah, they won't say we work with them, but an event attracts attention.
Okay,
And attention will bring in immediate dollars in an appeal.
but you might spend that money over the next 2 years.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the public gave to help Jasper and they don't realize it's a long process necessarily.
I'm gonna get into a complicated space here, but the governments give us money too, so we'll try to spend the public money as fast as possible because that's what people are seeing, and then we'll do the recovery in another space. But it's a space that's growing. You need to understand it takes time and there's a cycle. It's gonna be very complicated. You see what you're seeing on TV, the LA fires, and that's gonna be a very complicated rebuild. Because there's gonna be questions, first of all, can you rebuild there? Is there gonna be fires again, right? Are those communities gonna be affected again? So there's gonna be a whole bunch of things. If they rebuild, what use are they gonna do? And then where are you gonna get the money? And but some people won't have the money. So this is the whole complexity of that cycle that we need to understand. It's like the psychological impacts on people as well, the impacts on business and small community. It's a whole ecosystem that's affected. Yes.
Go ahead.
How much, if any, I guess the financial, but also less quantifiable aspects of the Red Cross is allocated to trying to minimize these from happening again? So you're saying, well, if we feel there, what's the probability that it happens again? Is it even safe? How involved would the Red Cross be post-crisis to say, okay, well, we're doing more assessments and trying to find ways to minimize these risks in the future?
Right, so it's not, that's not our role really, but you're gonna see that, so. We'll take Quebec, for example, and you'll see a lot more of that. The Quebec government has announced, I think, this year, that 70,000 homes are in flood areas, are risk areas. Now, this is a complex space because, and this happens everywhere, homes were allowed to be built there by municipal governments and so on, but all of a sudden they're redoing the risk maps and they're saying this area is at risk. It's going to create a problem because, you know, and then you'll see all kinds of lawsuits come out around that. But what happens is the insurance companies are saying, well, you're in a risk area, therefore I'm not going to insure, I'm going to insure you at a very high cost. So this is the space, and this is going to multiply everywhere. You're seeing this all around the world. The space we're in is we're in the preparedness of people. So we're trying to get ahead, and we'll try to do in the next years with volunteers, is identifying where there's areas of risk and sending our volunteers door to door to make sure people are aware of the risks, they're aware of their insurance, they're ready to evacuate. Because often when you evacuate, you know, did you evacuate? Did you leave with your, you have a prescription? Do you have all kinds of things? Are your papers in order? Are you prepared for that or not? So that's the area we're working in terms of mitigation. And then, so our personal preparedness, do we have a volunteer there? Do we have agreements with government? Ideally, can we get into some scenario planning in terms of how we deal with these events? A lot of this is to say, can we start recognizing that we need to anticipate events? I was in Montreal just a few weeks ago with the police chief, looking at we're looking at big urban areas. If we have a heat dome come into place like Montreal, you know, we saw that in Vancouver a few years ago. I think in the summertime, the average temperature in Vancouver is something like 64 or something. It was in the 90s for, you know, and
That's Fahrenheit.
yeah, sorry. Yes.
No, I did.
Yeah, no, you're right. But it went up to 38 Celsius, I think. In Vancouver, an average temperature around 22 in the summertime, right? So you imagine the same thing in a city like Montreal or Toronto, a big heat dome like this. It'll be hotter in the more inner city. Do you know where vulnerable people are? Have you identified them? Do you do the outreach, et cetera, et cetera? How do we get ahead of these things? It requires investing in preparing as opposed to just investing in the response. Yes.
My question is pretty simple, but what's your day-to-day like as a CEO of the
Well, today I'm at McGill.
Yeah.
It's a complex. It's not a simple answer in a way, but you know, so I have staff across the country, and we have operations around the world. So I have a mixture of. I've got a senior team that I deal with, and we've got a bit of a matrix. So I got maybe a good part of my time managing the structure and the decisions and the transformation and so on. And the other part with the external relations, either with government, the setup with donors. So I'm having this week in Montreal, Carl invited me, but I'm meeting with a number of donors, big donors. I'm meeting with Mila, actually, the artificial intelligence group at University of Montreal, because we're looking at how we can partner with AI in terms of projections. So it's a bit of a mixture in that sense. And I travel internationally about 30% of the time as well in our different operations. My job, again, is trying to prepare ourselves to be ready for the events, not just the after.
How do you handle your mental health? like it's always crises. How do you this is something I ask a bunch of CEOs because it's very challenging. How do you look after your own mental health?
I don't actually.
Okay, that's
No,
the wrong
kidding,
answer.
Just kidding. No, I think it's the simple answer in a lot of ways. You gotta make sure you lead a balanced life because we're having crisis. It's our business all the time. So the structures are there. So I try to exercise regularly. I turn off at night. I don't listen to the news all the time. It's just too much. And I just create some other space for that, right? You have to pace yourself. Somebody asked me about Haiti, actually. Who asked me about that and the poor impact? Because it's an interesting question.
I believe it was my question.
Okay,
So it was just
you
related.
get two questions.
Well,
Go ahead.
three technically. Yeah, it was more so relating to the way that the Red Cross was perceived after. So what I read was, because I was only 8 years old at the time. So,
Right.
what I read about was that there was a substantial amount of money, or what people perceived to be a substantial amount of money, and the impact seemed to be minimal, and there was a loss of trust.
Right. No, absolutely. I think the question was what, and it's fine. I mean, it's a good question. And I'll talk to you about that. It's interesting. I'm here also for a couple of days. So I've been invited tomorrow by the Max Bell School on public policy, actually, with Vincent Rigby, who was the former security advisor to the Prime Minister. One of the challenges I think you have to face as well, we have to face collectively, we're a time of misinformation, disinformation, at time in terms of the source. This is a little particular, but Haiti is a complicated place. It's a failed state. And what you're referring to is there were criticism of the Red Cross in terms of its work. It was criticism of the American Red Cross at the time.
Okay.
And it was a story that went on NPR that was the American Red Cross raised $500 million and only 4 houses built. Right, that was the title, and NPR ran with that. Now, I'm not going to go through all the details. The American Red Cross chose in Haiti not to do a lot of its own operations. It contracted through others, but the truth is it didn't build houses. That wasn't part of its mandate. So the title is right, but it's misleading. But you're stuck, right? And we're in different spaces like this. So in terms of the Canadian Red Cross, we did a lot of things that were very visual in terms of building houses and all that. So we did not have a negative impact. But there's running a number of stories. But we're seeing right now, we're seeing challenges in terms of the International Committee of the Red Cross work in Ukraine, challenged by the Ukrainians, criticizing the Red Cross for not accessing Russian prisoners of war. We're seeing criticism in Israel by the Israeli government in terms of not doing enough for the hostages at different times. So you're getting different types of information. You have to look at where the source is. And, and again, there is a deliberate movement to right now to attack a little bit the international institutions. The UN, the International Committee of the Red Cross, etc. We're seeing this on an ongoing basis in terms of the work. This is a larger picture, but we're in a post-Second World War era where a lot of what we call multilateralism, a lot of the big funding of international organization, WHO, etc. The idea was to have more collaboration around the world and work through UN agencies. All this was funded by the US. The US is the backbone of this, represented 20 to 25% of the funding. And you're seeing the news, President Trump and all that is questioning the engagement of that. So this is they're going to pull back the funding. We're going to see this. So we're in a time of changing context. At the same time, the needs are there. So it's a long answer. I wish I'd had a simpler one, but yes.
Right, so as president and CEO of the Red Cross, Canadian Red Cross,
Yeah.
what do you see as the biggest challenge facing humanitarian organizations today? And is the Red Cross doing anything to address it?
Yeah, there's a different challenge internationally. I think but domestically, our biggest challenge, I think, is the one I talked to, which is how do we, you know, I always like to say it's like the iceberg, right? The response is just the pointed part of the iceberg. If people say, how did you make it there? Why were you there? Why you were so organized? Because everything was done before that. So for us, our biggest challenge is we like to say, pay for the fire station, not just the response. So we're managing that. My fear all the time is that we have an event that gets over our capacity. Because as head of an organization like the Red Cross, you're expected to be prepared, whether you're funded for it or not. I mean, I say to my board all the time, they ask me, when do we say no? And I say, well, we can't say no to something in Canada. We can't say, oh, well, we'll pass on this big event because we're not prepared. We can say no internationally because we're not the only ones. So I think that's the biggest thing. For humanitarian organizations internationally, I think the biggest threat right now is the one I've talked to you about. I think we're seeing basically Western countries, I'm saying mostly Western countries, but the backbone of international aid and funding are definitely the US, the UK, Germany. The UK was a standard bearer a little bit. It was, and there was a lot of discussions. It was funding 0.7 of GDP to international. So the UK was there funding that through its conservative governments and so on. And in the last few years, they cut that in half and they used the money to work on asylum seekers and the whole migration issue. So they turned all that domestically. So we're seeing a cut in funding. Now, when the US government decides that it's going to suspend all its payments for 90 days, that has a huge impact on a whole bunch of small organizations. And there's a lot of questioning of the efficiency of some of the international aid structure. It's not the most efficient, but to just cut it from one day to the next is going to create a whole turmoil in that ecosystem. Yes.
Do you closely look at other similar organizations internationally to kind of like take lessons and learn from what's happening all around the world?
Yes, it's a very good question. So when I started a few years ago and we had less disasters here, we spent a lot of time in the US with the American Red Cross because they had the big hurricanes in the southern US. So we've learned from them. I have a call actually Wednesday with the CEO of the Australian Red Cross. We're looking at parallels there. And of course, we're working internationally with the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. So we're looking in the Red Cross family all the time about learning and all that. We're not, I mean, Canada has comparables to, of course, US. We're in a big space. Our colleagues in Europe are very strong in pre-hospital care, ambulances, etc. But Europe is all a bunch of small countries, and we're in a big country that has events all the time. So we're in this space, so we do look at that on a regular basis.
You'd also, some countries would call on you for your advice as well.
Oh yeah, we're in this dynamics, and we've been. I think one of the characteristics in terms of what we've done, and somebody asked me what we're proud of with different things. One thing we've done in the last number of years, which I think we started pre-COVID, which we were anticipating. We didn't anticipate COVID, but we sold half our buildings in Canada to invest in our platforms. Because the future is all based, really, our fundraising is on the platforms, our ability to, and all that. So it's not locations physically. Now, as my CFO says, we're running out of buildings. One of the challenges for us as a non-profit organization is to raise capital, to invest in technology to be ahead of what we need to be ahead of.
So when you think about the textbook, like there's the outside environment, which is what President Trump's doing, is changing that world. So it's a very strong impact on the industry. You look at what are their core competencies, and they've evolved from focused on blood and swimming lessons to where they no longer do that, developed a new set of competencies in his time as CEO. Other themes strike you from the textbook? From reading the textbook, anything else strikes you about what we've talked about today? Yeah, Annette.
I was wondering, how much does Envision play along the six trade, like
I don't think you're answering my question. Is that not, I think, Your Honor, I think the witness is avoiding my question.
My bad.
No, yeah, that's a good question. We'll come back to it. So the thought is that, go ahead, Roman. Not a question, but an insight.
Well, it is a question, regarding the textbook.
Okay.
Just to say how, how do you ensure strategic alignment across those different regions within Canada? In order to empower local leadership. We talked about emergent strategy, so coming, from the people down, directly in contact with those situations.
So how do you do strategy?
Yeah.
Is it you sit in your office and think deep thoughts? And then you call and say, okay, guys, or how do you do strategy?
Yeah,
I know you think deep thoughts, but
no, can I use this?
I think so. What does it say on it? It says, board master. So I'm thinking it's all right.
Well, okay, well, you're not sure.
Oh, no, it's labeled board master, so I think it's all right.
Yeah, so one of the big changes in terms of how we do things, yeah, it's good. So when I started, I told you, we use that a bit of a crisis. We had a structure with all these Red Crosses across the country. So you had the Quebec Red Cross, the Ontario Red Cross, et cetera. And so we had a management structure that was a lot of generalists running all this. We changed that in the last few years. Been part of the bottom up, but really we professionalized it. So somebody asked me how we increased the fundraising a lot, because it's in my papers a little bit. And when I came in, so we had, the Quebec, I started here, so we had our emergency operations, we had our fund development, and et cetera. And then I was the general manager of that. But I wasn't an expert in all these things. And a lot of the Canadian organizations are structured like that. So we've changed, and today we have our service line. So we have emergency management. Our fundraising is one concentrated unit. So we have about 180 full-time staff in fundraising. We've got digital fundraising, we've got major gift fundraising, we've got direct marketing fundraising, et cetera. Emergency management. So we've divided the across the line. We have the specialized services, we have the back room, and we have the government relations. So we have a presence in every capital in terms of more account management. And so you've seen the shift of professionalization in the organization. So when you talk about, I think.
So is that headquartered in Ottawa, like the fundraising's headquartered in Ottawa, but you'd have people in Montreal and Toronto and so on?
Yeah, so that's a good thing. It's no longer a headquarter notion. Our expertise is across the country, but
Okay.
to answer more specifically, our fundraising center is
Yeah.
Toronto. That's where the money is. Our government relations federal center is Ottawa. We have staff in Quebec City for Quebec, in Toronto for Ontario, et cetera, et cetera. So we're managing a little bit of this change. The challenge in terms of innovation and all that has been, we create our own app for registration and all that. That's really challenging to do. Why? Because there's no tool out there. American Red Cross uses Salesforce, but it's not adapted for the registration and case management. But that was a risk, and it's really hard because you got to attract software development young people that are not interested in building their own thing and selling it for I don't know how many millions of dollars, right? To commit. So it's hard to attract and build in our context. So there's a bit of a risk, but now we've managed it. So we're up past that.
So you should sell it around the world, should you not?
Yeah. So
Why don't you?
So I'm meeting the Australian Red Cross so that we could share the development of the software.
You mean sell?
Don't worry, we have a whole legal team to look at all the.
No, but
conditions of that.
rightly, you spend a lot of money, so you should get money back from that. Are we happy with that, business students? Like, it's fine to do that, and hey, if it's the Australian Red Cross, we're not gonna make a lot of profit, we're going to charge them to help pay for our expenses.
So-
It's a
so-
reasonable approach.
So maybe just one step back, just to,
Okay.
one of the big shifts here, really, and you'll understand that we're trying to do, and it's a big shift in the humanitarian space, is you know, when an event happens, you can say in the past, something happens in a region or whatever, and then you send whatever you think is needed. You're sending personnel, medical, you know, whatever, to help people, cots, blankets, etc. What's shifted for us and where we're building things, and somebody asked me, you asked me about AI, is if we can register everybody, if we can engage them, we'll create the response platform. So instead of saying, I don't know what your needs are, you're gonna tell me what your needs are. So I don't need to go through a local organization or whatever. I can register directly and I'll create the platform. So I know 7,000 people have been evacuated. I'm gonna register, understand all their needs, provide direct financial assistance and start building the response plan as opposed to depending on anybody else. Say it's the same, you know, once you have the relationship, you can build it. So we build a lot of the technology around that and then the case management, and then we're sharing the learnings and we're building a little deeper, which brings us, I mean, we did the immediate cash assistance, sheltering. Now I was on the call yesterday with ATCO in Alberta, looking at temporary housing. So we're growing in this space, right? So that makes sense. So this is when we're working internationally, I mean, working with my colleagues, how do you take care in Ukraine? We're heavily involved in Ukraine. How do you take care of 7 million people on the move? Ideally, it's not waiting for them at the border with water bottles. That's what the image you saw. If you could register them all on the platform, then you could follow them, you can transfer money, you can create your response structure, right? So for years ago, when I started the Red Cross, everybody was building their operations center. This was the big thing, you know. You went into every Red Cross around the world. They had this fancy operation. You put your camera, you put your big TVs around and all this stuff. I wanted one too because it's great when you do an interview. You know, you got a backdrop. Today, it's not important for us. We can create the operations center anywhere because our information's on these platforms. So we can create an operations center directly in any space, right? So this has been the shift. So we're getting a lot of information. So your point is the tool is the data, the currency is the data. So we're gathering a lot of data and understanding, and then we could project what would be the impacts, what are the loss, what could be the mitigation. The direction is, if you're into financing, is the future is going to be a lot into impact bonds. So can we predict, you know, can we lessen the loss and could we put a value to that? And could we get funds to invest in that? So there's a lot of interest. So we're talking, there's interest in working with the Red Cross because we have such a strong brand that we could get interest from the corporate sector, the banks, before the events happen, because they want to get into this future planning and so on, right? Because we're trying to put a value to being prepared to lessen the loss. If that makes sense. Yes. Oh, well, we'll get somebody else first.
What group is presenting today? So we should end in 5 minutes? Okay. You need about 20 minutes or so. Okay.
Yes. I have a question about the logistics of the Red Cross itself. I understand that it's obviously a very big logistical problem to basically reach the transportation at the right time.
Yeah.
So how do you think, what's the time that, how long does it take for Red Cross to reach a distress location when it's genuine?
Well, first of all, you have to start off with 191 Red Cross and Red Crescents. So if you're talking about an event, give me an event in anywhere, give me a place in the world where you want us to be.
Okay. I don't know, Vancouver, this one.
Oh, Vancouver. No, so first of all, it's about the local capacity. So you're building your local capacity. I thought you were going around the world. So we have the local capacity there. And then you bring in what's needed from the outside.
But what happens when it's an interview?
International is the same thing. So we're dealing with a local capacity, but, you know, and again, we're trying to bring in, this is the big shift. You know, you see a lot of people, every time there's a big event, people want to donate things to us. It's extremely costly to bring things around the world. And we don't also send general volunteers because there's a lot in the different place. But we have our mobile field hospital. So we have a team of logistics that can move anything. We deployed a field hospitals in the most in some of the highest regions of Nepal a few years ago. We can go anywhere. But we don't own a fleet. We rent different pieces and we have our equipment, right? So I think the message a little bit for those who want to work in the same field in terms of the big organizations, it's very specialized. So our logistic team are compared to the best. Our marketing team compete with Harvard and other areas in terms of the service industry. And this is what we try to attract, but of course, they're coming for a bigger cause, right? Bigger purpose. All right. Any
So one
last question? Yeah.
How many tips, sorry?
The last question.
No, we need the age.
You got too many already. Who didn't have a question? Yes.
Especially
Do you have a chart?
how big or small is it like? For the right cost.
Well, no, we're involved in local emergencies as well, and actually, so we're in an emergency. And so the good example is if you're in Montreal here, we have teams of volunteers if there are fires downtown or fires anywhere in the region. And if you're wherever you're living and goes on fire, you'll see the Red Cross will be there and we'll provide 72 hours of housing or longer. So that's a small event. A big event is a small event getting bigger and bigger. So we're in this space on an ongoing basis, and that helps us because the challenge, of course, in terms of the area we are with volunteers and emergency teams is how do you keep active when nothing happens, right? And how do you get prepared for the biggest event? What is the biggest risk actually in Canada that worries the government and worries the insurance industry? What's the biggest natural risk? Fire? No. Anybody? Biggest risk. It would bankrupt a good part of the financial industry. Actually, what your team did a work for me. They estimated about 60 to 80 billion dollars of loss.
The financial sector in Toronto,
No,
not Parliament, surely.
natural disaster.
Okay.
I'm talking.
Oh,
Are
the
they-
Liberals getting reelected.
Are they Canadians here?
Yeah, there are a number of Canadians.
Okay, so I'll give you. Yes? No? No, the snowstorm won't cost $80 billion.
Earthquakes?
Drought,
No,
Earthquakes.
Tell us.
hurricanes.
yes, it's the big earthquake that hits Vancouver. It's the biggest risk. Right? And the chances that there are an earthquake on the west coast are very high.
Yeah, California. That's
60 to 80 billion dollars. All right,
All right, thank you. Appreciate that.
all right.
You want to take?
Oh, yeah. All right.
That's great.
Thanks. Yep.